All right. So good evening, folks. Um, so 2 weeks ago, we started looking at um, the question really of what is Kabbalah and what does it teach. And obviously, I'm not going to you know recount everything that we said 2 weeks ago because we make even less progress than we otherwise would. But it is the word Kabbalah means something that is received, and in modern Hebrew, the word Kabbalah also means a receipt, like you get at the grocery store. And it's a tradition that spans hundreds of years. And as many of you have heard me say, in other contexts, if you're looking for consistency, um, you're not going to find it. I mean, frankly, if you're looking for consistency, Judaism is probably the wrong religion for you, because we don't have a hierarchy. Anybody who's able to say yes, this is like authentic, authoritative, normative belief, and this is not. So there are different streams of thought within Kabbalah, disagreements, contradictions, whatever. But I did want to back up a little bit before we continue with the readings from Professor Matt's anthology, because he's going to make reference to the Sphirot, the 10 Sphirot. And so I want to look at that concept just a little bit. And some of us were at his study day that he did a few weeks ago for the Haberman Institute, and he discussed that. And I have to say, I said this 2 weeks ago, and it is all the more true for the concept of Sphirot. That I am teaching this, frankly, in response to many requests that I have put off over the years. And the reason that I put them off is because I don't know very much about Kabbalah. I still don't know very much about Kabbalah, so don't assume that just because I say something that therefore it is authoritative. And if that is true of Kabbalah writ large, it's all the more so true for the concept of the Sphirot, which I have spent a reasonable amount of time over the last few weeks trying to understand, and I have perhaps progressed just a little bit. But Professor Matt has a chart in his book of the Sphirot, which he calls the body of God. And if you're going to, again, if you know other trends in Jewish thought, the idea of the body of God, if it's not a term that shocks you, it should, right? The idea that God has a body. Right at the end of every Friday night service, we sing Yigdal, right? Yigdal, which is a sort of poetic rephrasing of Maimonides' 13 Articles of Faith. And one of them is Ein lo demut haguf ve'eno guf, right? God does not have the appearance of a body, and he is not a body, right? So Maimonides would not have been happy with the concept of the spherot representing the body of God, right? But if you were either a week ago tonight when I taught that material from Zera Kodesh on what precisely was heard at Sinai. And I gave a little bit of a précis of it as an introduction to Yizkor on Saturday morning. One of the things that the Zera Kodesh teaches is that, all right, so according to the Zera Kodesh, the only thing that was heard at Sinai was the first letter of the first commandment, which is the letter Aleph, which is a silent letter. Okay, but the Zera Kodesh says that Aleph contains within it the gematria of the name of God, because Aleph is actually, if you look at it, it's two yuds and a diagonal vav. Yud has the numerical equivalent of 10, Vav has the numerical equivalent of 6. So Yud, Yud, Vav gives you 26. Yud, He, Vav, He, which is the name of God, also gives you 26. So the Aleph is the gematria equivalent of God's name, but not only that, and this is more relevant for this particular piece, the human face is also the gematria equivalent of God's name. How? Because the two eyes are also two yuds, and the mouth is a vav. Okay, so the human face is also yud yud vav, or 26, the gematria equivalent of God's name, yud he vav he. Right. I will also point out, especially since I'm going to my college reunion tomorrow, that Hey Vav Yud Hey, which spells Hoya, also gives you 26, or the equivalent of the name of God. That's not in Daniel Matt's book. It's not in the Zera Kodesh. So that is perhaps the only original thought that you will hear all night this evening. But anyway, so that is also the human body, right? Because the Torah says we're created in the image of God, which mostly we understand that as a metaphor. But for the Zera Kodesh, it's not a metaphor. It's like our body literally contains God's name. Okay, so having said that, unless there are questions, we'll look at the chart from Professor Matt's book. I have to move this over. All right, let me zoom this in a little bit more. Back down. All right, pay no attention to my thumb at the bottom, because when I scan this. Okay, so this is the 10 Sefirot, right? And how is it the body of God? And obviously Professor Matt explained this much more, but you have you have the head, which is Keter, and you have a right side and a left side, which are feminine and masculine. So in the Kabbalah, in the Sefirot, there is a feminine aspect of God and a masculine aspect of God, and this down here, Yesod represents the phallus. and right, and so you have also, you have the right leg and the left leg, but these are, um and so, like, um one of the things that, the question always arises about what should the Jewish attitude be towards Christianity, right? And specifically, is Christianity monotheistic, right? And you will certainly hear, and certainly, like anti-missionary rabbis say that Christianity isn't monotheistic, right? Why? Because you have the Trinity, right? The Trinity. And so, right, like monotheist versus, polytheist, right? And, but, a Christian will tell you, well, no, the Trinity is not three different gods. It's three aspects of the one God, or three different ways that human beings experience or relate to God. Um, but if Christian missionaries knew more about Kabbalah, they would say, to those anti-missionary rabbis, well, you say Christianity is not monotheistic because of the Trinity. Well, we have three, you guys have 10, right? You've got the 10 sphirot, and they interact with each other, right? But they're not 10 different gods or 10 different aspects of God, right? And by analogy, I mean, like, if you have a baseball team, right? If it's an American League baseball team, right, there are 10 players. If it's a National League baseball team, there are 9 players, right? They're nine, but they're not, right? There are a number of different players, but it's still only one team, right? And so that is one way, I think, of of kind of looking at it. Yeah. Did I see a hand? Yeah, Alan.
Two things. One, realize both the National League and the American League now have uh, the designated hitter rule,
I
so
did
both of
not
them have
know that.
10. My question, and it was my question when we were uh, listening to Dr. Matt, where exactly, and I've read through this, not as much as I probably should, where exactly do we get the idea of these 10 Sifrot? Is that Lorianic? Was that De Leon who came up with it? Where do we get this?
I mean, I think it's real. I think it's Lurianic. I think it is from Lurianic Kabbalah, and for those of you for whom that might not be a familiar term, Isaac Luria, otherwise known as the Ari, Ashkenazi Rabbi Yitzhak, lived in Sfat, Safed in northern Israel, right after the exile, from the expulsion from Spain. And a lot of these concepts really, I think, found like their strongest, and highest, really, if you will, expression in Lorianic thought. I mean, Zohar is obviously earlier, and I think it has elements of this as well. But I think, kind of, and I could really be wrong, because I don't think I know much more about this than you do. But I think it reached its sort of like final expression with Luria. Yeah, Leslie.
What does Seraphiot mean?
Sefirot.
Sephirot?
Well, yeah. there's some argument again about that. Okay, there's really some argument about that. I mean, there are certain terms in Kabbalah that we don't really know, right? I mean, the root sefer, right, gives us like a book, right? A book is called a sefer, but a number is also a mispar, right? So, um, I mean, I think the best way to translate the word Sphirot are aspects of God. Um, but the etymology of them is not really clear, frankly. Um, you know, which means, I guess, that there's a PhD thesis waiting to be written. Um, but I would call it, an aspect of God. Um, Another way of looking at them, actually, it's a good segue, is they're like the building blocks of mysticism, but they are the 10 channels or attributes or emanations of which we experience God. Okay. And the idea, I think, is that like the fullness of God um, is unknowable, right? And that's called the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof means without end. Okay, the endless. Um, and and so they're definitely not different beings. They're different ways that human beings experience it, right? I mean, it's, when I was looking, it kind of reminds me of the of the myth or the analogy of right, of the blind man and the elephant, right? You have right, a lot of blind men or blind people, and they are encountering an elephant, and they describe the elephant in terms of the particular piece of the element that they touch, right? So the blind person who touches the tail says, "Oh, an elephant is like a rope," right? And if they touch the leg, oh, an elephant is like a tree, right? And if they touch the trunk, oh, an elephant is like, I don't know, a snake or a hose or whatever. And all of those are true, right? All of those are right. They are the truth and nothing but the truth, but not the whole truth, right? And so I think in that sense, right, since we can't possibly grasp the full reality of God, so the Sphirot are different aspects of God that um, we can experience, right? Or it's like a, a, a prism, right? I mean, the light goes into the prism, and again, it's one beam of light, but it splinters into a number of different ways. And all of these are analogies, right? They're not representing like any sort of literal truth. They're analogies, right? And so then when they're in their classical form in this chart, it's called, right, the Eitz Hayim, or the tree of life, right? And then so these columns, like, they work in different ways. You've got um, you know the the right hand side which I would think of as the left hand side actually, but that's right. It's my left, but it's the chart's right. So the left hand side are the feminine aspects, right, which are also the aspects that represent mercy. And the right hand side are the masculine aspects, which represent, right, judgment or justice, right? And again, I mean, there are two different aspects, right? And we know this, right? That if the world operated strictly according to principles just of justice and no mercy, right, none of us would be around, frankly, right? I mean, I don't know you people all that well, but I know that you're human beings, right? And therefore, right, like it, in God's sight, right, all of us are lacking in some way, right? So we rely on God's mercy, right? But if there was only mercy, the world also can't exist, right? The world needs both justice and mercy, and they need to balance each other, right? And that and so that concept is certainly older than this material because it's shot through the liturgy of of the high holidays, right? Avinu Malkeinu, right? I mean, it should really be, if you think about it, Malkeinu Avinu, right? Because the Melech represents God acting with us according to the characteristic of judgment, right? But then the Avinu, the parent, represents God acting with us in the aspect of mercy, right? And at a certain point in the liturgy, right, God begins the high holidays sitting on the throne of judgment, right? And then at a certain point, God gets up off the throne of judgment and sits on the throne of mercy, right? And that's how we, manage to get through the high holidays and continue even our existence. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much more time on this, right? But so we've got masculine, feminine, we've got also judgment and mercy. We've also got sphirot that represent the intellect, which are Keter, Chochma, and Bina, so the top level, and then the middle level of Chesed and Gvura and Tiferet represent the heart or emotion, and then the bottom represents the practical or the tactical, right? And then they all come together in the physical realm, which some sources call malchut, which means kingship, but others call shekhinah, right? Shekhinah, which represents the specifically feminine aspect of God, and not only specifically feminine, but in some Kabbalistic writing, actually God's consort, right? Like Mrs. God. Right? And the whole, and we'll see this. I mean, and I've mentioned this in other contexts, which is one of the things that prompted like people to want me to pay a little bit more attention to these Kabbalistic ideas, right? But that that God is alienated, separated, and God wants to reunite with God's self, right? And so, like the divine, let's say the Creator God wants to reunite with the Shekhinah, right? And sometimes that is described in quite explicitly sexual terms. Um, and I mean, Kabbalah has an interesting relationship, I think, towards sexuality, because it really does talk about God having a phallus and God having a consort. But it also, I mean, I think I mentioned this. I'm not sure if it was 2 weeks ago or more recently than that, about this concept of the tikkun on Shavuot, right? Where like, I want to say traditionally, but it's not that traditional because it only started in the 15 or 1600s, right? Which in Jewish terms is nothing, right? But it doesn't mean you stay up until 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. It means you stay up all night studying. And why is it called a tikkun? What does the word tikkun mean? It means to repair, right? Well, what is being repaired, right? Is the idea that on Shavuot we like quite literally reenact the revelation at Sinai, right? And in order to receive the Torah at Sinai, um, the men had to refrain from sexual contact for 3 days, right? And the reason that the original reason for the Tikkun Leil Shavuot was to make sure that the men would not have a nocturnal emission the night before Shavuot, so that they could be able to re-experience that revelation at Sinai. I mean, frankly, not so concerned about women, but the Torah wasn't that concerned, unfortunately, about women either, right? When it says, uh, be ready, get yourselves ready for 3 days. Do not go near a woman, right? So there's it's a complicated attitude towards sexuality in the Kabbalah as well, right? But so the goal one, I mean, I think one of the goals of a spiritual life, according to this Kabbalistic Sephardic idea, is to achieve balance, right? Is to achieve balance, right? Balance between justice and mercy, balance between intellect and emotion, balance between male and female, right? Balance between universalism and particularism, right? I mean, I read an article. I don't know if anybody else reads. There's a publication that comes out every weekday called E-Jewish Philanthropy. Um, and there was an article this morning on the fight that is going on now in American Reform Judaism about universalism versus particularism, okay? Particularly vis-a-vis Israel, right? And the idea that certainly reform being the most politically liberal branch of American Judaism, right? And yet and I think sometimes this is overstated, but just because it's overstated doesn't mean there isn't, a basis for it. Is that the progressive coalitions that certainly the reform movement has been involved in, and that many American Jews who are not reform, um, are less and less friendly to Israel, right? And I think that is a fair statement, right? And so, some people are saying, well, then let's walk around, we'll walk away from that, and others saying, no, if to have allies, you need to be an ally, and we're never going to impact people if we just walk away from them. But at any rate, the idea of achieving balance, right? Which is why I think actually potentially conservative Judaism can be the most healthy form of Judaism on the American scene, because we explicitly call for balance, right? Balance between intellect and emotions, balance between universalism and particularism, balance between justice and mercy, balance between male and female, which I think is what, one of the things that the Kabbalah is aiming at. Okay, so let me stop here for a minute, and if there are any questions or comments on what we've done so far.
Yeah. Um, it seems to me, because of its positioning, that Tiferet is the only element that can connect to every other element without an intermediary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if there's a larger point to be made that all these aspects have to be tempered by compassion, perhaps, or reinforced by compassion.
Um, One would think that. I mean, I'm gonna plead I'm gonna plead that I don't know, right? I mean, the chart would seem to indicate that, right? And I think, um, I think beyond that, I mean, I think it represents, um, to my way of thinking, if you, I mean, not that there's a hierarchy, but if you would have to say, like, what is the personality characteristic that is most key to a religious way of being, I think it is compassion, right? I mean, I, when I meet somebody, right, who is, very, very punctilious, they're strict about observing Shabbat, and they're strict about kashrut, or, or the Christian or Muslim equivalent of that, but they lack compassion, right? It's a problem. And I've said this before. I mean, that I forget who exactly said it. I think it might be in Sefer HaChinuch, but that if you meet somebody who is lacking in compassion, it casts doubt on whether they are in fact actually Jewish, right? Because Jews are known as Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim, right? Compassionate children of compassionate parents, right? So if you lack compassion, you're right. You're not a compassionate child of compassionate parents, right? And therefore, you really have cast doubt on the question of whether you are really a Jew at all, right? And if we take that statement seriously, I think then compassion really is like the central, the central meda, the central character trait for a religious personality. Yeah. All right. So let's go back to Professor Matt's book then. All right. So right, this is talking about the idea of Simsum, right? That right when we read in Isaiah, right? Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melo Chol Haaretz Kavodo. Right? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory. And these texts take that quite literally, right? If the whole earth is full of God's glory, right? Or like in as similarly in the kedusha of Musaf, right? Kavodo male olam, right? The God's glory fills the universe, right? Um, that there was no room for anything else, right? Like God, like physically took up space, took up all of the space in the universe, and there's no room, therefore, for anything else. And if there's going to be creation, then God has to empty space of God's essence to make room for other things to exist, right? And just like I mean, and I think sometimes religious leaders don't exercise enough of that character of simsum of making room for others, right? I mean, like when I say, well, somebody want to lead mincha, somebody lead maariv, right? It doesn't mean that I can't do it, don't want to do it, right? But other people, even if I do it like better in some way. I don't have a better voice or know the tunes better, but I'll probably read the Hebrew more accurately than anybody else. But that's not the only value, right? Is that people, or like I said, I'm not the God, right? I don't want to own your religious life. I want to give you the tools to own your own religious life, right? But too often, I think, like with the previous sale of the building that fell through, right? Because the pastor had a severe cardiac event, right? 5 days before the end of the due diligence period, right? Like, hard to imagine. I don't know. But in those kind of evangelical churches, the church and the pastor is the same thing, right? And if the pastor is not well, then the church can't function. Yeah, Leslie.
Is Simsun, and what does that actually mean? But is that a Kabbalistic idea, or is that just a general Jewish, thought?
It is an idea that begins in Kabbalah and has spread beyond Kabbalah.
And what does it mean?
It means contraction.
That word in Hebrew is contraction?
Right. Right. Litzamtzem is to contract. Okay. So you know, yeah, to contract, I think is the best. You're muted again.
It's funny you said that because I was just thinking about contraction, like giving birth, and in a way, that those two thoughts are related. God gave birth to the world in a sense by
Right.
and so that's kind of interesting.
Right. And if there's no contraction, then there's no birth. Right. If there's no contraction, there's no birth. Right. So yeah, I think they are. I mean, they're not linguistically related because I mean, contraction, that medical term of contraction in Hebrew is not simsum. I don't know what it is. I know it's probably contractia, but I'm not actually sure. But yes, right. If there's no contraction, then there's no birth. So absolutely, the analogy holds for sure, right? And um, look, what we chances are at some point in your life, you have met a person who is 30, 40, 50 years old and never really grew up, right? And possibly one of the reasons that that person never grew up is because their parents never made room for them to grow up, right? And I mean, it's true, certainly true in education as well, right? Or when I was a Hillel director, right, and you had a board meeting, and one of the board members says, "Oh yeah, I'll buy the potato chips." Right, and 10 minutes before the board meeting, Rabbi, I forgot to buy the potato chips. Right, so what do? Right? You could either run out and buy the potato chips, in which case, what you have taught this kid is that they don't have to, you know, fulfill the responsibilities that they've taken upon themselves, right? Or you could say, well, then I guess there won't be potato chips, right? And my attitude was then there won't be potato chips. But um, anyway, so yeah, so Tzimtzum, right? We have to contract or withdraw to make room for others. Right. So for creation to exist, Ein Sof withdraws from itself to itself, within itself, and it left an empty space within its essence in which it could emanate and create, kind of like the Big Bang. I mean, I think that when we get to the uh, Shvirata Keli, right, withdrawal and shattering, and again, right, I mean, I find myself, on a very level playing field here because I know very little about Kabbalah, and I also know very, very little about, um, astrophysics. So, but a lot of what you read in these Kabbalistic accounts of creation, of you know of contraction and then shattering, reminds me of a lot of what I've read about the Big Bang. I mean, I think I think that is I think it's true, and I think it's pretty remarkable. Okay, so let's go on. If you have your own book, we're at the top of page 94, right? When the supernal emanator wished to create this material universe, it withdrew its presence. At first, Ein Sof filled everything, right? Kavodo maleola. Now still even an inanimate stone is illuminated by it. Otherwise, the stone could not exist at all. It would disintegrate. The illumination of Ein Sof clothes itself in garment upon garment. At the beginning of creation, when Ein Sof withdrew its presence all around in every direction, it left a vacuum in the middle, surrounded on all sides by the light of Ein Sof, empty precisely in the middle. The light withdrew like water in a pond displaced by a stone. When a stone is dropped in a pond, the water at that spot does not disappear. It merges with the rest. I like that analogy. At least for me, it helped me understand, what this is talking about. So the withdrawn light converged beyond, and in the middle remained a vacuum. Then all the opacity and density of judgment within the light of Ein Sof, like a drop in the ocean, was extracted. Descending into the vacuum, it transformed into an amorphous mass surrounded in every direction by the light of Ein Sof. Out of this mass emanated the four worlds: emanation, creation, formation, and actualization. Right? For in its simple desire to realize its intention, the emanator relumined the mass with a ray of the light withdrawn at first. Not all of the light, because if it had all returned, the original state would have been restored, which was not the intention, right? I mean, this is beautiful poetry. I find it a little hard to follow, frankly, but I think the next paragraph makes it a little bit clearer, right? To fashion pottery, the potter first takes an unformed mass of clay and then puts his hand inside the mass to shape it. So the supernal emanator put its hand into the amorphous mass, that is, a ray of light returned from above. As the light began to enter the mass, vessels were formed. From the purest light, Keter, Nek Tochma, then Bina, and so on, through all 10 Sphirot. Since Keter was the purest and clearest of all the vessels, it could bear the light within it, but Chochmah and Bina, though more translucent than those below, were not like Keter. Not having its capacity, their backs broke and they fell from their position. As the light descended further, 6 points appeared, 6 fragments of what had been 1 point of life. Thus the vessel shattered. Their spiritual essence, the light, ascended back to the mother's womb, while the shattered vessels fell to the world of creation, right? So, right, at first there's nothing but God, right? And then God withdraws to make room for everything else, but the everything else can't exist without like some aspect of God in it, right? But then all of that shattered, right? Because the light, I mean, this is the way I understand it, right? The light wants to return to its source, right? It doesn't want to remain imprisoned in the material world, right? So the light goes back to its source. Right, which is the shatter, Shvirata Kelim, the shattering of the vessels, right? But right, but everything else can't exist without some of that light, right? But that light still, so some of that light is like trapped. It's trapped inside the physical world, but it still yearns to go back to its source, right? Yeah, Leslie.
Well, when you read that, I thought of the shattering vessels as being the human being being broken. I mean, we have some light, but we're also broken in some ways. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. We're all broken, right? We're all broken, and I think, look, this is I think this is very, very complicated stuff, right? And one of the reasons that we are broken is, right. I mean, what, right? The psychological concept of alienation, right. We're alienated from ourselves, right? We're alienated from ourselves. We're alienated from God. We're alienated from other human beings, right? And this is, I mean, I think this is kind of like the existential tragedy, right? Is that we're alienated, right? And we seek unity, right? But if we have full unity, then we cease to exist, right? Right? I mean, right? If we're fully united with God, we don't exist anymore, right? We're fully united, right? I mean, when we're little kids, right? We want to be fully united, most of us, right, with our mother, right? But if we're fully united with our mother, we also don't exist, right? I mean, right? Mom's contractions cast us out, right? So in that sense, I mean, human existence is very tragic, right? Because we seek a unity that we can't ever achieve and fully. And if we were to fully achieve that unity, we wouldn't exist anymore, right? But that lack of unity is alienation, and it causes its own. It causes its own dilemmas.
But
Yeah.
isn't the Torah all about us in a sense? I don't want to say reuniting with God, but I mean, isn't that trying to make us, in a sense, holy and reuniting with God?
Yeah, but I think the Kabbalistic idea goes much further than the original Torahitic idea. I think because I mean there's unity and there's unity, right? I mean like there's a unity which is like a harmony, right? And then there's a unity that's absorption, right? And the Kabbalistic idea, I think, is that really, I mean, I think in this concept, like the world is really one organism, right? The world is really one organism, and so so that alienation, I don't know, it's a splintering, right? It's a splintering whereas I think that in the biblical sense, God and humanity are related, but they're distinct, right? But I think in Kabbalah, everything that exists is an emanation of God, right? Which I mean is a difficult concept when you deal with certain historical figures that you want to say, where is the godliness, right? I mean, where is the godliness in Hitler, right? But it had to be there in some sense. I again, I have no answer for that either, frankly. But and it's much easier, right, to go to fall back on a dualism, right? That's there's God and there's Satan and they're struggling in the world, and Hitler, belongs to the satanic, right? But that's not. I mean, I don't think that's a Jewish idea, and it's certainly not a Kabbalistic idea. So, none of this stuff is really simple. Let's go on a little bit more. All right. All right. So the light ascended back to the mother's womb while the shattered vessels fell to the world of creation. When the light emanated once again, regenerated, arrayed anew, it extended only to the end of the world of emanation. Emanation denotes this extension of the light of Ein Sof during the time of regeneration. Emanation consists of 5 visages. These visages are reconfigurations of the points of light, capable now of receiving the light so that no shattering occur as at first. Below these visages, the light of Ein Sof appears only through a screen. As when you sit in the shade, though the sun does not shine on you directly, it illuminates the shaded area. In a similar manner, the light of Ein Sof illuminates the world of creation through a screen indirectly. The supernal vacuum is like a field in which are sown 10 points of light. Just as each grain of seed grows according to its fertile power, so does each of these points. And just as a seed cannot grow to perfection as long as it maintains its original form, growth coming only through decomposition, so these points could not become perfect configurations as long as they maintain their original form, but only by shattering. Okay, so, right, I like that. Growth comes only through decomposition. What we're going to get to, and I'm not going to try to go there tonight, but we'll look at it in 2 weeks. It is this idea, which I described in other classes of how, right? So you have this light, right, which belongs, is part of the Godhead, and it's trapped in materiality, is known as klipot. And when really anybody, but especially Jews, when they do a mitzvah, that light is released from its prison of physicality and reunites with the Godhead. And when sufficient of that light reunites, that's when the Messiah comes, right? And so that is why you can have Chabad, and you'll say, well, and they'll say, well, light Shabbos can't. Oh, I'm too busy. All right, just do it once. right? Just do it once, right? Put on tefillin. Just do it once, right? Because you never know, right? Like maybe that one time you light Shabbos candles, maybe that one time that you put on tefillin will be the mitzvah that tips the scale, right? That releases that very last point of light that brings the divine unity. It's powerful. I mean, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I believe that it is a very powerful idea. And that more Jews than just Chabad should be, looking to give people opportunity to do mitzvot without worrying about, well, but are they going to join? Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but maybe that's not the be all and end all of our existence. All right. Any last questions, comments? All right. Thanks. I'll see you all before then, but if not, see you all in 2 weeks.
Enjoy your reading.
Good night. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Heavy concepts.
Yeah. Very.